you start out with this little idea, and then before you know it, that little idea is like a mile wide and a foot deep. Architects are very skilled at looking at buildings, urban situations, people in urban situations, and in thinking about those things. Nobody else in the professional spectrum does it the way architects do, and that's a great thing. And there's a huge value to that. You can turn it into a lot of different things that may not be traditional architecture.
still have vivid recollections of, my days in my undergrad, of sacred little spaces, that just bring me back, when I was on campus, the time I sat there and had a cup of coffee or studied with a group of my fellow students, there's just what brings you back. That's what creates a strong alumnus. That's what creates a strong donor in the end, right? And so what we're building here at UTEP is your university, it's part of the community, and we want to spread it out to the community so that it becomes an asset to the community. So the master plan paints a big idea, then the campus transformation they're ready to engage on is sort of the landscaping gives it the soul and the personality, okay? So a lot of the principles that we're trying to do is we've given the big idea, okay? We've all agreed, everybody that's, has some semblance of control has agreed that that's the master plan that we're going to implement. And understand that the master plan is not cast in stone, okay? It just gives you the main idea. The biggest challenge to urban campuses now is the loss of community because we've isolated, the neighborhoods. Because, we look at neighborhoods. Here we have a mini city, right? But then we have an engineering neighborhood. We have a science neighborhood. If we were to create a whole swath of just chemists along this area, this would be an area that would just be informed by them. And we don't really have a sense of community, right? Why not integrate a liberal arts building right next to them so that we have a lot of cross-pollination between those different disciplines? Again, it's an idea, but bringing people and creating a community asset is what's going to make for a very successful campus. Look at the pedestrian patterns. Go out there and, pay attention to where people are moving. Okay, where's the energy happening? And let those things guide. Here's a great place for me to do some intervention, okay? So try to look at those things. Yes, of course, urban campuses revitalization is a lesson that we've learned, Now that's going to take city partnerships, and you got to get everybody engaged. We're trying to encourage lingering, okay? And we're trying to also encourage the idea of having faculty hang around. A lot of people think that a lot of the learning experience happens inside a classroom. That's only part of it, really, about maybe 40%. A lot of what happens is where you linger, okay, and where you interact, okay? That's part of your college experience, is lingering in the spaces. So the idea of getting people to hang, and it's a campus where you can linger and it becomes a pedestrian experience. So we have the same topography that we have in Bhutan here. So in Bhutan, they typically have an upper courtyard and a lower courtyard. Upper courtyard being called the WOM, and then the lower courtyard the GA. So we have that here. We did a lot better job on that on the College of Health Science because of the diagonality of the courtyards. But this one still does that, and you have the qualitative aspect. So again, how is it that we inform, pulling people into this courtyard? You see that little sliver of glass? As you begin to see people there, you begin to see an interest that's going to automatically draw you. All those little interventions are about architecture with an urban impact, okay? How do you address the public realm? How do you engage the public realm rather than turning its face on it like this building does, okay? That's not a welcoming building, okay? So it's got a lot of sculptural qualities, but it sort of turned its back on the street. Now we begin to open this one up, okay? A little bit more. And then the idea of the public courtyards that you see in Bhutan that have a lot of transparency and porosity, you begin to see here. That was a big push for me, okay? I mean, they were really reticent about trying to put glass here. We played a lot with the architects and trying to make sure we had northern orientations, and we have this spectacular light. You have movement of the building. These people are here 24/7. They're all scientists. So you're very safe in that courtyard, okay? It's open itself to that public space. So. I think to me the biggest joy is when you can get people to congregate. I think that's the thing you've succeeded. I mean, to me, New York is sort of like a big carnival, okay? There's a lot of events happening that are trying to attract your attention. I mean, there's some strong urbanity in the pocket parks. It's sort of. So here you look at this elevated railroad track that is abandoned. And of course, the initial American thought process would be, let's just demolish it and send it to the landfill, okay? When they hired Dealers Cofidio to do this work, I mean, they took a very light approach to this, and that's the approach we wanted to take at UTEP.
The Highline was built in the 1930s, and it had a pretty good run. It ran until the 1980s. But with the rise of interstate trucking, the need to transfer goods by freight declined significantly, and a portion of the Highline actually was demolished in the 60s, and then another portion in the 90s. And so this portion here was demolished, a portion in the 60s and then another portion in the 90s. So at one point it ran all the way from 34th Street down to Clarkson Street. So it was a pretty significant piece of infrastructure at the time and was important for how goods came in and out of Manhattan. The wind, birds would drop seeds, and over the course of 30 years, this kind of wild self-sown landscape took root in the ballast of the rails and the ties on the High Line. This was one of the key inspirations. You know, the landscape component of the project is critical, but also there's this idea of how do you introduce walkways into this wild landscape without making it seem like you're walking on a sidewalk and there just happens to be a planting bed next to you. And so what the design team has come up with here, and you can see it right behind me, is this what we call a planking system, which is these regular 1 foot by 12 foot units. And there are different pieces, different components, but the walkway is the kind of key piece. And from that, you see these comb-like concrete elements just to the south here, and that's what we call taper planks. And as you can see, they start out the width of the adjacent plank, but then they taper into the planting bed. And what that does is it blends the edge between the planting bed and the walkway, the walking surface. So you don't have a hard edge, but you have a soft edge that undulates as you walk. Another thing that you can see as part of the planking language is this furniture that's been built in, the peel-up benches that emerge from the walking surface, using the same 12-inch width, peel up from the walking surface and become the furniture. It's this idea of integration. Everything is coming from the walking surface. Most interactions, at least when I was in school, happened on my way to the cafeteria or on my way to the library, and it happened with other students kind of walking or riding their bike or coming into contact with vehicles. It's just kind of that experience, and you don't really think about moving sectionally as much on a campus. So I think what's interesting is the design team was able to do some very subtle things very well across the extent of the High Line. The structure is not that wide, there isn't a lot of space to do that much, but what they've done is really captured kind of the essence of the adjacent buildings, the architecture, the local architecture, in this case, carving into the structure itself. And I think it really provides a dynamic kind of episodic journey as you're walking up through the extent of the High Line.
These universities own very little open space. It's like Columbia is really the only people that have like a real campus in the city. Everybody else is trying to create. They all have the same problem. NYU has this problem where they are located around Washington Square Park, but they have, that's not their space. It's public space, and their identity is basically these flags that fly outside the buildings.
I think it's important at an institution that you feel that you belong there and that it feels like home and you identify with it, so that total immersion in the city, let's say, in the fabric, is probably, to me, not desirable. I think there needs to be some sense that even if you are integrated into the neighborhood, let's say, that you still, that there's something that identifies you, the building, let's say, maybe the public space, maybe there's a quasi-private space that is, you know, part of what you're doing. NYU is a big university. It's the largest private university in the country, and so even modest growth, let's say each department maybe grows 1 or 2%, which is not unreasonable. That really adds up when you have, you know, 20,000 students and 50,000 if you count all the part-times. What we're trying to do here is open up what have been perceived as sort of large impenetrable blocks, and the idea is that we bring light and pedestrian traffic more easily into these spaces so that we can promote a greater sense of continuity through the campus. You know, it's important to imagine what the life is going to be like in the various proposals that you have. Same thing here, we're sort of saying it's not just green space, it's got to have some purpose, and then how you design it ultimately is, you know, that's how you can measure the success, is whether it lives up to its proposed, you know, purpose. I think what we've tried to do is imagine, you know, what sort of needs are both unfulfilled. Let's say it's open space, let's say it's a performance venue that is for the use of the community. Let's say it's a non-denominational religious venue because something like that doesn't exist, or that religious groups are having a hard time finding space. Those kind of uses where maybe their constituents don't have the resources to actually, you know, get their own space.
You want to engage the community, you still have to do what you got to do, you know, for the function that's in that building. So there are different challenges of how you engage in a practical, helpful way. So you know, they do different things up at the medical school than they do architecturally than they do down here. And the new building that they're doing up there with Liz Diller is kind of looking at doing it in some other unique ways. So the university is getting much more. It's much more a part of their design language now to look for it in new projects. How are we engaging? How are we engaging the community, and maybe not in both an architectural and non-architectural way, which I think is a very good thing. You know, there's architectural spaces, gestures, and things you can do that are very overt, you know, and useful. And then there are other things like the community benefits agreement that we have, which is about a different ethical obligation to a community and how you engage that, which, you know, to have the two together is, you know, it's a great thing. As you start to think about your development, you know, those ideas you want to communicate at the master planning level before you kind of go down to the individual building.
The new school was sort of spread throughout the city, and it kind of grew up organically. It started out as a couple different schools. I think Parsons was actually a separate school originally, and originally it was the New School for Social Research, but now that's one of 7 different schools that they have. And they're really sort of exist throughout the city, and their identity exists of, you know, they fly like an orange banner outside of the building that they're in, and that's kind of how they mark where their campus is.
What started this whole thing was to develop gallery space for the students to display their work and to bring in work from museums and other galleries around the city. One of the chief concerns about this was to literally propel the project onto the street so that passersby can look in, so that they can see what's going on. This is one of the major spaces that evokes that kind of connection to the city. It's become quite clear that social spaces, gathering spaces, study spaces are really crucial for the students, and so we're finding pockets all over the place to create that space.
In a lot of the plans for new campuses, the idea of, this old idea of course, having a community center and a campus building, that was fine, but I think really making it much more planned for the businesses, that maybe the business can help, not just with the funding of the building, but with the use of the building. Roosevelt Island here in New York City, basically residential. I don't think many of the people that live in New York City have even been to Roosevelt Island. And so beautiful strip water surrounding, fantastic location. Not sure about how we're going to get everybody there, but to take something that's right there in the midst of this great city of New York and having it be a catalyst not just for education but for business, and that business can feed education, education can feed business, so to create a whole new something else.
Our success is an important part of the city's success, and I think many other cities have found that to be the case, that cities that have a viable and an active university tend to do better than cities that don't, because it attracts a broader spectrum of people. You have less reliance on maybe a single industry, and so that's important.
We didn't have money to go spend on new buildings. All we could do was develop public awareness about qualities of a space and an area and get people engaged with it, and maybe start their own kind of, more grassroots approach to how do we keep our city the way we want it, or make it the way we want it if it's not, and through public engagement.
I think having a community campus near downtown would be a really great thing, because the best way to enliven space is to provide a place for people. Well, El Paso is it's an interesting place. It doesn't have, well, as far as I know, it's never had a kind of a long-range master plan for development. I think it's really important to have a roadmap or a plan of how to develop the city, and more importantly, how to preserve what's already working well and what's already good. El Paso has a lot of beautiful historic buildings, houses, and commercial buildings that I think give it a lot of character and sense of place. I think it's really important to preserve that.
A vibrant city has great connections between its different neighborhoods and has interconnections between the amenities it has. The campus shouldn't be secluded. It's an open campus, basically, and that adds a lot of vibrancy. The same way downtown has that vibrancy. We don't exclude parts of downtown. All of it is part of the whole, and so a better connection between the downtown area proper and the campus can only help both. It'll add more vibrancy to the campus, make it a more exciting campus for the students themselves, because they're so close to everything exciting in downtown, and an exciting downtown that has a lot of students that want to come back and forth and enjoy it adds to the good things that are happening in downtown. as well. So it really is a really good relationship with both benefiting from how can we improve our connections and how can one bleed into the other.
And then you'll start to see the restaurants and the eateries and the museums and the galleries and all the public spaces where people hang out, the cafes. Now we have a vibrant downtown. So you gotta create the seed. You gotta plant the seed that's gonna do that.
But, you know, as you start to keep working through that, you know, you might have time to do it, to engage outside groups, you may not. I mean, it's, you have a semester to do this. God bless you. You know? I remember that feeling when I was in the thesis year. It's like, I have one semester, you know, and it seems like,
all right, guys, I ran out of gas.
that are now part of the university. So this just throws me off.
New York is feeling pretty good right now. I think everybody, I hope we show you a good time.
Just have a moment of genuinity.